All right. Assuming everybody can see that. Hello,
Looks fine
everyone.
to me.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to, no, it's okay. October 21st, or sorry, 24th edition of the SIG Network meeting. This meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down effectively to be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. This meeting has an open agenda. It looks like there's a lot on there, but there's not that much on there. If there's anything that you'd like to add at any time, please do feel free to add it to the bottom of today's agenda. Please use the raise hand feature in Zoom for questions or interjections, as that helps us to kind of keep things flowing and organize the sync. Yeah, so with that, I think we can probably just get started on the agenda for today. And we'll get started with triage. I've started by filtering out the ones that are already assigned, if that is agreeable for everyone, and we can just kind of start going through these, maybe oldest to, 2017. Should we start at the back, you think, Tim? Or the front?
Given this list, I don't think it really matters, but
Okay, let's just start at the
go
front
right
then.
ahead.
All right. Failure cluster host port validates there's no conflict between pods with same host port, but different host IP and protocol. Oh, it looks like Damon and Antonio have taken a look at it.
Yeah, there is a test that creates a lot of pods and happens to impact this test more than the others. So I don't know if there is a timeout where that the test waits or anything. This test in particular is conformance and it was tuned several times with an heuristic, this estimate maximum pods. Well, I don't know if we can do something to, if the problem is that the networking test is more sensible and we can make it more resilient, or we can make the other less aggressive. But, I mean, somebody want to have some fun on going into the guts of this E3 test. I'm happy to provide support.
Cool. Any
Anybody wants
takers
to
for
take?
that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say the same thing. Anybody wants to crack into some of the test failures? It looks like the test itself is semantically correct, but environmentally, it's getting a failure.
Oh, I can try this again.
Cool. Thank you, Damon. And as Antonio said, if you need support, we are here to support. So let us know if you run into any blockers while you're doing that. There we go. Appreciate that. Looks like could be a chance to kind of take an opinionated stab on how to kind of redo the tests a little bit.
These tests are conformance.
Roger that.
I mean, there is room for improving, but the blast radius for this test is
That's what I was getting at, was that it sounded the way you phrased it, like this may actually be an area for some more general improvement.
yeah,
And
yeah, definitely. But what I'm trying to say, improvement within the context of the test, not just let's try to redo it in a different way because it's conformance, and if we change the semantics, we break people qualifying. So I
roger
mean,
that.
all the ideas or opinions are perfectly valid. Yes. In this case, we need to be extra careful.
Roger that. Next one up. Kubernetes cannot pull from a private registry deployed with cluster IP.
Yeah, this is the one of the use cases where like localhost node ports ended up being really important. And I know IP tables supports it and IPVS does not, and I think NF tables does not support local host ports, node ports.
Right.
Yeah, the problem here is we're trying to use kubelet to pull from a pod that is behind a service, and they're trying to do it by name. You can't really responsibly have kubelet do name lookups against the cluster DNS. I mean, you could, but it's kind of circular. So kubelet can't find the name. And it doesn't, I'm not sure it's reasonable anyway, because you kind of have a bootstrapping problem. So I'm not sure what we want to do with this. We could suggest use a node port, but then localhost node ports don't work. So you have to specify it in terms of an actual IP, which isn't super useful as an end user.
Can you scroll down? I think the poster eventually did that. Yeah. One comment up, I think they switched to the IP address there. Directly use the cluster IP and the lookup fails, but that error looks sus. It's the one
You mind
that's
scrolling over? It says error. Like, what is that error?
Yeah.
What? That's weird. It's still looking up the name.
I think in the Helm configuration, they have given the name itself.
Oh, so it's doing a redirect to itself, but using the name?
Yeah, if you scroll at the top, the configuration clearly says the name.
Right. You can assign this one to me. I'll comment here. I'm not sure what the right resolution is. But I'll think a little bit about what mechanisms might work.
Roger that. Next one, kubeproxy IPVS failed to add IPVF service error, no such file or directory. Network is disconnected and then restored. kubeproxy logs errors. As a result, the service IP cannot be added to kube IPVS 0.
Can you scroll right there?
You got it. Lars has been taking a look at it too. Is Lars in here? I don't see Lars in here.
I think if Lars is already looking at it, you can assign it to him for triage.
Roger that. It's a legit bug. Triage accepted. So he did triage it. So yeah. Wait, why is it needs triage then? Okay. So this is not needs triage. This has been gone through pretty decently, I'm guessing, if Lars took a look at it. So
But it did say needs triage when you scroll back to the top. Oh,
yeah, it did. Okay,
it's old.
It's old.
Okay.
It's old. What do you think, Tim? Just re-accept it?
Sorry, I got distracted looking at the next one. If we think, oh, it's really old. Why is this back on our? Oh, just because it was re-triaged?
Yeah, it was bumped by the triage bot.
Got it. I
Usually
think
we leave this. I mean, no answer in 1 year.
yeah, I think we close it.
Okay. I'll take care of that asynchronously then and put a nice message on it about closed does not mean that we won't ever work on it again. And
if somebody has more evidence or whatever, please bring it back.
Exactly. I'll make sure that's on there. So I'll take care of that afterwards. What do we got? Kube IP so these are the last three. wondering if some of these were bumped as well.
Probably.
Let's go straight there. Okay, Antonio has been taking a look at this one. So this one is readiness failed, but Kubernetes service endpoints exist from 2023. We have an API server with KMS. If KMS or any other probe fail, the Kubernetes service endpoints still exist in default namespaces.
This is because the API server. Let me go back if I remember correctly. Yeah, this is because the API server has its own logic for reconciling points, and the it doesn't check if something is working. It doesn't check the health. And I talked with David and all the people, and said that it's not worthy the risk of adding this logic to the API server just for that.
Roger that.
They want to implement the API server has some health checks, and one of the health checks is KMS. KMS, can you say it so I can pronounce it?
KMS.
KMS. Okay. So this KMS is an external service. So the API server, this will add a dependency on external service for the readiness of the API server. So it can break the entire cluster, right? If it is external service and you stop publishing the endpoints, the risk is too high for the win. So basically, you have a KMS, just be sure that it is ready.
So the question here is, should we be preventing users from pointing a gun at their own feet?
What?
If somebody wants to configure it to have a health check that we think is a bad idea, is it our problem to prevent them from doing that? Or is it...
No. The question here is that, I mean, the API server, this endpoint is the signal for the rest of the cluster and the load balancer, right? So all the control plane depend on that.
Yes.
So at least your request gets to the API server. It fails because this KMS service then doesn't work, because I think that it's used for encrypting etcd or something like that. But
right.
If you start to play with the readiness of the endpoints, it means that you may be fluctuating or not even sending the traffic to the control plane just because KMS failed.
Right, but that's a configuration choice that somebody made, right?
In which is when you have a pod and use in cluster config, you are using this endpoint, right, to get to the control plane. When you deploy, you are usually all the implementations, when they deploy their control planes, use this readiness for the front ends. No, they use the health checks, right? That will not fail. Now I'm getting this back. Only the internal traffic from the cluster will keep working. So let me rephrase. If you have a load balancer in front of your control plane, you usually use the health checks of the API server. Then it's your choice to decide what you want to do with the signal, with the KMS signal. What is not your choice is if you use the Kubernetes.default service that use these endpoints that are always present independently, that the API server has this KMS thing failing. That's the...
So when I'm scanning this is an old issue. I vaguely remember it. Are they configuring an API server pod with a readiness probe that checks KMS? Is that what this is?
No, the thing is that what they want is that when KMS fails, the endpoint of the API server, the one that is backing up the Kubernetes.default, says is in not ready, right? Or it's not even present address.
Right, and they're configuring that somehow, right? Through
No,
a pod.
they want to make this configurable.
Oh, but they're not running the API server as a static pod or something.
Maybe I know. The API server always put its address in the endpoint. Okay, what they want is if the API server notices that has the KMS thing failing, do not put the address in the endpoint.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how would they express that in the first place.
You can plan the health check to the reconciler, but the problem is that if any health check fails, you start to
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was asking, is there an existing mechanism that they can do that or not? I think like the answer is no, right? Because it's coming internally. It's not, we're not going through the regular kubelet health checker to figure out that the pod is unhealthy and then looking at endpoint. Like we do it all ourselves internally.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing.
Okay. I feel like the answer here is probably going to be close, but I'll respond to it. I'll put this in my queue for today.
Roger that. Generic versus platform / backend specific options in kubeproxy.
This is one that probably got pinged by the bot. You can just
Indeed.
reaccept it. Damon's working on it.
Okay. Thank you. Consider network resource management guarantees scheduling from 2017.
Yeah, this is an oldie. So there's a KEP for quality of service based resources, and it's been backburnered while we've been figuring out how to do DRA and in place resources. In place resizes and DRA and pod level resources. So we just said we can't take a fourth KEP in the resource area at the same time. I wonder if I can just point this to that. This is a request for scheduling. Munners is responding. All right, I'll take this one too because I like the old ones.
I was talking with him with James, and they have an interesting use case. And I think that, as you say, once all this tooling is in Cube, we can do something better.
Yeah, I think we can do something better. I don't think of it like a scheduling problem. I think of it as a quality of service problem.
Yeah, but they have a scheduling problem.
I'll have to go reread. I'll have to read his updates. Can I pop one more onto the
which one?
list?
What number?
127259.
Okay, go ahead.
So this issue is basically like it comes down to, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it comes down to, can we do something better with contract for DNS? This has come up over and over and over again over the years, and we keep saying we probably could do something better, but we haven't really done anything better. I mean, I guess I want to ask again, like, should we keep this open? There's a related issue which is linked there, which is kube proxy should exempt local traffic from going through contract, which is a little bit more specific than can we do better. If we think that we can do better, I'm happy to just retitle this and close the duplicate one in favor of this. But I wanted to put it out here. It basically becomes, we figure out the right expressions for no track or some other mechanism to say we're not going to consume contract resources, or that we will allow some level of configuration of contract based on what the traffic actually is. Like DNS doesn't need to be tracked beyond one response, sorts of things.
What's the relationship? And because we know that like DNS has massive contract issues, but for this particular issue, they were basically saying it's only local traffic that they really care about.
I think this was like between the app and node local DNS or something.
Oh, interesting. I see.
Like
because
those
node local is
still
already node tracked. in the
Or maybe it
default
wasn't node local.
implementation.
I'm forgetting the details then on this one, but yeah, I forget the exact details of this, but I remember that we discussed it and it came down to, yeah, you're running out of contract again.
I feel like we should definitely do something about contract and DNS. Whether that means do something more generic or not, I'm not sure.
Okay, cool. If you're all cool with that, then I'll throw an update on this. I will retitle it and add a little bit of extra context and make it more general. Of course, that makes it less actionable. It still doesn't actually have like anybody who's working on it, but at least we can say, yes, we agree that there are issues here.
But the problem is the DNS, some distros install it as a service and others not. And
I'd say like
some,
Dan's comment is probably the most interesting. Is like it is like a hack to basically create this like magic service that's local, and we should see if it generalizes instead of keeping the hack.
Yeah, I mean, Node Local DNS was a hack when we put it in place, what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? Maybe we can do better now.
So I actually just pushed a PR to enhancements to add preferred node local semantics to traffic distribution prefer close. Um, so yeah, I'm actually thinking about all this right now.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll tag you. I'll use this issue 127259, and I'll see if there's any dupes, and I'll close them in favor of this one, and we'll use this to collect the thoughts. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Roger that. And I think that we're at half hour, probably concludes triage for today.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, we ran long.
No, it's okay. We don't have a ton. Oh, Natalie did add something. So let's actually, Natalie, would you like to go first? Just, you don't have to, but
Sure. I'm not really sure how the format of these usually works, so
it's pretty laid back. We just kind of like, I'll click the link here and tell us
yeah.
about what you want to tell us about.
Yeah. So basically, we generate in our different products, we generate different URLs for clients to access those products in our operators. And so far, we've just been assuming that cluster domain is always clustered at local, but that is turning into a problem that we want to resolve more generally now. We've had some approaches. There is the whole, like, you can just omit the cluster domain and something will happen, but we want to try to generate, global domains, well, absolute domains, rather than, relying on the search context of wherever the client is. And so we've been going through, like, there is no general config to retrieve this. So we have basically, well, either we can let users override this, just like the kubelet does, just like core DNS does as well, I believe, and others. But we would like to see, like, is there a way to get an API to actually auto-detect this? Because, I mean, as I think it was Tim mentioned somewhere, that, this is something that basically has to be the same in the cluster anyway. And then, yeah, the document goes over a few options or what can we do right now is either guess from the resolve conf, but, that's relying hard on an implementation detail, as far as I'm concerned. You can use the config-z API of the node, but again, that's explicitly documented as, like, unstable debugging infrastructure. And then we have, what was the name? Yeah, Rich's status Z and flag Z APIs. And then Antonio mentioned using, potentially in the future, adding a downward API so that we could just, inject it as an environment variable or whatever else. And not even, sorry?
Yeah, this problem, there were 3 issues related in 1 week for people asking for this. So when I saw you in Slack, I said, oh, these people is all doing a group and pushing for this. But yeah, I mean, it's a well-known problem, and well,
There
I
is no
think
test domain conspiracy.
The real problem here is it is in practice a configuration that is distributed across many components. And we don't have a like cluster configuration object in our API where you can go and look at cluster configuration. But this is effectively a cluster configuration because if you configure different nodes differently, it's going to do weird things. It might be correct, but it's probably not. And so we've sort of left it in limbo of there isn't an obvious place to go read it. And we didn't want to invent magic words. Like we didn't want to publish this in an environment variable somewhere just sort of automatically because we don't like to do that. So, I said in my comment here, downward API seems like the sort of obvious place to put this, or the obvious mechanism for a workload to be able to get this information. What I think we need to figure out is what do we call it? Like, how does it generalize? This is one example of a broader problem that if we start with one of them, we're going to end up with many of them. That's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing to expose configuration, but we got to come up with a name so that we don't end up, documenting some stupid name that doesn't make any sense because we didn't think about it.
We have also this other request from James, right? That the people want. So we have seen now this demand from the people that run things on nodes to have information from the node, because at the end this is a property of the node, right? We want it or not, the cluster DNS. So I think that the downward API to have some know this information. I like the runtime thing. You didn't like the name, but I like the name.
I'm not. Don't let me name things, man. You should know this by
Kubernetes.
now. Downward API. That's how you end up with names like that. So we should. I have no problem with this as a general idea. Obviously, it's a KEP that needs to get written for next cycle. We'll need to get somebody on the node side to think about like, is this a general kubelet configuration thing, or are we actually defining some sort of magic words that have meaning regardless of what the kubelet configuration is? Like should it be a field path into the kubelet config, or should it just be a magic word that says cluster domain?
I think that Adrian is wanting to help to drive this. So the question is, if makes sense, I mean, and somebody wants to take on this, from SIG Network, what do we say? Just go explore it and come with a more fleshed out solution?
Yeah,
on my side, I think that makes sense.
Flesh out the doc, see if you can solicit some feedback from Signode, somebody, to see if they have opinions about whether it generalizes to more things that kubelet knows about that workloads don't. I would explore a little bit to see if there are other issues of similar things. Nothing comes to my head immediately, but I bet that there's
the node labels, the node zones, right?
Well, node labels are sort of different because those are really about the node. This is about the configuration of the cluster. It's sort of different.
That's where we disagree. It's a configuration of the node. I understand what you mean,
I disagree.
but it's
Actually, I
not what
disagree
it
with
is.
you. I disagree with you there because we did explore, but we never like went further with this idea that you could have a cluster with multiple domains that depending on a pod configuration, you could have different DNS schema, right? Like we don't love the DNS schema. We could fix it by having a v2 that had a different name and a different, layout. Um, and a pod could select v2, and if it did, then it would want to know which one was configured for this pod, right? Um, so, or this namespace or with this tenant or whatever. Um, so I don't think that it's a configuration of the node. I think we configure it at the node, but it's actually workload. And so we just need to figure out if this is something that we like, how are we going to treat it? And what are the other examples that fall into the same bucket?
But the bottom line is up for somebody to take it and drive it and
Another example here could be cluster name. Like we've talked about whether clusters have a name that people should know about, like not a domain, but like a name in some context. How would they learn about that? Um, Anything that you can sort of squint and see as a cluster level configuration today, we don't have any exposure for. Maybe the way to find these is go look at all the variables defined in local up cluster .sh and see if any of them make sense in the same pattern. I'm not saying we should add them all at the same time, but they might help establish a pattern. I see a hand, Natalie.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like talking about the whole, like, we're good at storing, like, things that are stored for the whole cluster, but not very good at, storing cluster global configuration. It feels like quite a few of the, like, global config maps and kube system in general kind of came from similar things.
Yes. And the reason we've never used a config map for this is the way we do authorization is generally per namespace, and I don't want to give every workload the ability to read config maps from the system namespaces.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't saying that's the correct way to do it. I was
Okay.
just thinking, like, it feels like this is something that has happened before, and I like just wondering out loud whether that
Yeah.
was how it ended up happening those times.
Probably people said, I don't want to solve this for real. I'll just do a thing.
Yeah.
But I'm fine to solve it for real. It's not even that hard of a change technically. It's just figuring out that we're going, in the right pattern. Because we're going to set a precedent, and whatever precedent we set, people will follow or try anyway.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if a group like multi-cluster would be trying to answer questions like this, like a cluster name or, something unique about a cluster because you have multiple of them now.
Possibly. They definitely have some properties. Actually, cluster property may be a thing that we want to look at here. So they've defined an API called cluster property, which is like a key value for the cluster. So maybe the right vector here is actually to say there's a well-known cluster property, which is the domain, although I'm not sure that that's the right way to go about it. But these are the options I would consider. So yeah, maybe drop in on a SIG multi and ask them. One of the interesting things about multi-cluster is that is mutable. Like a cluster can be part of a group at one moment and not part of a group the next moment. So probably environment variables are not the right API for that. Whereas the domain that a workload was started with is not mutable.
Good conversation. Don't see any other hands up. Does anybody else have anything to bring up on this?
You can put me as you work out this doc, you can put me and I'll sign Antonio up as reviewers for the KEP. just, talk to somebody in SIG node, maybe multi-cluster, think about what other things fit here. And then we'll talk about it in the 33 cycle. So you've got a few months to do your homework.
Just checking, who's the you in that sentence? Natalie or somebody on SIG Network?
I mean, whoever owns this doc, whoever's driving the KEP, if you're participating in that, then you are part of the U. Yes, Natalie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to try to drive this forward. I'm just not super familiar with the process in general, but
Sure, I'm happy to help walk you through it. Although Adrian is somewhat familiar with the process now, so he can also help you.
You can ask me
Sorry,
for help and then ask Tim for help.
it's a learning process. It's not super difficult. It's step one, like do the homework, figure out what the alternatives, possible options are, and what opinions people have about it. Step two is write a KEP, and we'll go through it with a finer tooth comb.
Did you get out of this what you were hoping for today, Natalie? You got a way forward, got some feeling pretty good about the next steps?
yeah, no, it's great to hear people's thoughts on the matter and get some movement forward on the question.
Cool.
I'm happy that this is a relatively easy one.
Relatively, yeah. Okay, keep in touch with us. Let us know if you need any support in moving that forward.
Yep. Thank you.
PSA, I've just been saying it at every meeting. CFP for London is kind of coming sooner than I think people might have realized. It will close less than 2 weeks after Salt Lake, so it's coming right up. Don't forget to start thinking about what proposals you want. I know Salt Lake's just about to happen, but don't lose track of it. And then this is something we did a PR for recently. We don't have to dig into it too deep, but just so you know, we updated our README to include a sub-project lead section, which adds a little bit more color on project leadership within SIG Network. The TLDR just being that we're trying to encourage more bidirectional communication, just more places in which we touch base as a SIG with sub-projects and vice versa. So give that a read if you're interested, and specifically if you're running a sub-project. And to that end, I wanted to give a little bit of an update on what's going on in Gateway API. I had this on the agenda for last week. I've changed it since then, since some other things have occurred. But just, I'll go over it briefly if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, it's really just a PSA as well. We've been very busy. There's lots of discussion topics, things that have been of growing importance. I wanted to list some of those so that people are aware if they were not. Policy attachment and auth are some of the larger features and kind of problem domains in which there's a lot going on there and a lot of people involved, and we have a lot of energy to kind of move that forward. I can give definitions for any of these, by the way. If anybody's not familiar, please do say, hey, tell me more about that. On the not so humongous side of things, we have timeouts, retries, backend TLS policy, and session persistence, which are ongoing. In general, we've been talking about for some months now, basically since GA, but it's been ramping up a lot this year, that we want to improve the UX for Gateway API, in particular from the developer perspective. For those who aren't aware, Gateway API is role-oriented. Like Ingress was just Ingress, but Gateway API has like a gateway class for the infrastructure admin, a gateway for whoever operates the proxy, and then ultimately HTTP routes, which attach to the gateway. And so there's these different roles associated with these different APIs. And the developer one is one of the ones that we wanted to focus on, but it can be hard. Gateway API has a lot of features, and there were some things in the spreading this out between multiple different things and different roles where there's connection between these roles, and we're looking at ways to potentially make that better. There's a lot of different conversations going on. I linked at least this one here, and then ultimately we are talking about potential ways to make the API better, but also ways to improve the documentation and tooling. So we're going to try to improve our website soon, and also we are sending out, I didn't write this down, but we are sending out a what do you call it? Ingress Nginx did this at some point, but they sent out a form that people can fill out to kind of give feedback. So we're sending out a feedback form soon. We're going to put that all over our website and in the mailing list and possibly a blog post or something like that to get more feedback, particularly from users and developers. We're also working through some difficulties that relate to being developed and distributed with CRDs. There are some discussions here. These two I'll give a high level, but if you're interested, go dive in. One of them is, the top one here is CRD lifecycle management in general is challenging, can be challenging. And then the bottom one is we are at a point now where we think we created experimental and standard CRDs so that we could have a different set of CRDs with our experimental features. And we may be switching to having that be a different group so you can actually have both at the same time because of some of the problems with conflicts between these. It's not directly related to what we're doing. I mean, it relates, but it's not as directly related to some of the challenges, but we are working on a CRD best practices guide. There's a mailing list post about where this came from. Because we have other projects like multi-network, which are moving to CRDs, and we're trying to provide a little bit more guidance and some structure for how these kinds of projects doing these things should, the kind of things they might run into and the kind of things they should think about when they do that. Non-L7 has been struggling to mature. This group may be particularly interested in this, I don't know. But like TCP route and UDP route are, I mean, at this point, the issues are actually closed as not planned. We have not been able to get anybody from the community to come forward and champion those forward. So the APIs are going to just stay there. But they're not growing and maturing. So if those are areas of interest for you, like L4 Ingress, please do join us in Gateway API. We'd be very happy to have somebody who wants to kind of start driving on that, pull together some allies, and see if we can come up with what that should look like for the future. TLS route is not stuck, but has been having some difficulties. It's kind of a trickier one. If you're interested in having a TLS ingress route via Gateway API and you want to jump in, there's definitely room to help out with that one as well. Last but not least, we are trying to figure out, or rather, I think we kind of just need somebody to come and start driving on what's next for Gamma. Gamma is using Gateway API for service mesh. We kind of got to the point where we called it standard with the use of HTTP route in a service mesh east-west context. But we haven't had much anything else since then. We're not really sure where it should go next. So if you're interested in service mesh and would be interested in trying to figure out like some standard APIs and upstream for how to configure your service mesh, please do join us there. That's part of just the regular meetings now. There used to be separate ones. And then last but not least, if you're interested in any of the stuff going on with Gateway API, if you want to get involved, if you have questions and stuff like that, and you'll be at KubeCon, we have several breakout sessions. And I listed a link to our breakout sessions doc here, where you can go see all the different topics, which we're trying to organize breakout sessions for. We'd love to have you join us.
Shane, I had a question on the CRD lifecycle because I know that there are other SIGs who are using CRDs as part of standard APIs like SIG storage. Is there any kind of like did we talk to them about are they experiencing the same thing, or we are the most sophisticated user and therefore these are
not SIG storage specifically? We have been talking with other areas. So like been talking with CAPI folks. They're having something similar, Cluster API, and a couple other groups that are also. I mean, everybody's doing CRDs, but it's interesting to now have these kind of official ones, quote air quotes, that everybody converges on and maybe has hard dependencies on. You know, like Cert Manager had a common CRD for a very long time, but calling it a hard, it had some of these problems, but having a hard dependency on them. So we've talked with. I mean, there's been quite a few different groups. I'm currently talking with a couple of different groups about, and there's two angles to this too. There's like the integrator and developer, or sorry, integrator and like user perspective. I don't want the user to ever have to even know what a CRD is if they don't need to. I want the CRD thing to be completely opaque from the user perspective. And today, it's not particularly. And then the integrator perspective where it's like, hey, the platform has provided something and I have to try to figure out how to like organize myself around what they're doing, and then the platform perspective. And so all these different perspectives have different incentives and stuff like that, and different things going on with how they want to manage CRDs. And different platforms are doing different things today. Some platforms aren't doing anything today. There are a lot of, I think there's still a lot of products out there that use the CRDs that just say, here, go curl install it or kubectl install it from GitHub. And so we need to kind of, as a group right now, we're trying to come up with like guidance on how people should actually do this. We have some active issues going on too, like where we've seen recently where like Linkerd and Trafic, which are both CNCF products that use Gateway API, are incompatible with each other because of the CRD differences with Gateway API right now. So yes, we are not doing this in any kind of vacuum or isolation. We have been communicating with others that have similar problems.
But what's the problem related? I mean, I work in OpenShift, and you can see more CRTs there than across all the clusters in the world. I'm trying to read these talks, and is the problem for the CRD itself, or because of these channels and additional things that Gateway has?
I think, well, the channels is one aspect, and we're working on that. And I think that a lot of people are behind the idea of just having different groups for the different channels. That might solve a lot of problems. So that's the second one. That might be an easy one to fix ultimately if we just do that. Just take some like legwork. The lifecycle management was a little bit more interesting because you have to try to come up with guidance to anticipate, like, for any given implementation, what version they are on, and if they're going to be compatible with the CRDs that are on the cluster they're on, or if one.
Sorry for pausing. Can you expand a bit more on that? What is this compatibility mean? Right? Are the types not compatible? I don't know. Just if you can educate me.
Yeah, I mean, in the case, well, this is actually more related to the second one, but in the case of like the Trafic and Linkerd issue that we're kind of tracking right now, that one is actually because Linkerd wants v1 alpha 2 of gRPC route, and Trafic wants v1, and they're both using Helm charts, and they're both like trying to manage the CRDs themselves. So you actually have to have the two be compatible today, you have to hack the charts, because I guess the problem in this case is lifecycle management. That's probably one of the bigger issues as a whole, which is the top issue, the 2655, that we're kind of trying to work on and provide more guidance for. And that is just, we didn't have this guidance early enough, so people have just made decisions about how to tell their customers how to manage these CRDs. Go ahead, Dan.
That's it. But,
So it is not possible to install two separate versions of the same CRD because they would have the same name, I guess?
Well, maybe we're trying to make it so that it is possible to do that with like experimental and standard separation. Well, I don't know if I understood the question correctly.
Like with non-CRD APIs, you could just have, some people using the V1 version of an API and some people using the V1 beta 1 version, and that's totally fine. And so it seems to me, I would have guessed that it worked the same way with CRDs, that if one implementation wanted to install the V1 CRD and another one wanted to install the V1 Alpha 1 CRD, that it would just work.
Yeah, you need to implement conversion. No, that works. I mean, you need to implement conversion and all this stuff.
You have to implement conversion, and that is a challenge within itself. And so we've been very, very careful in Gateway API about like not like super extra careful about like what everything's additive, obviously. And like some of the problems that we have been kind of doing well with is like making sure that everything is additive, so we don't get into situations where you have something that will be missing in a future version. But that's not technically true with the alpha version. It's like right now, because of the way CRDs work, if you go and you say, the stored version is like V1 of whatever API, you'll get converted on the fly to that, and it may be lossy. And things like that we're just kind of thinking through.
Yeah, but that's why you have all these Jordan and all these people with the API reviews hitting everybody so hard.
I think one thing that would be interesting is like, is this just because one project is using alpha, which technically does like mean you've like enrolled yourself into some form of non-compatibility,
That is part of it.
or does it
again,
exist outside of that, which is way more concerning?
I think it's in this specific case right now with like 3106, it's mostly about that and the fact that like we didn't have a good preface with lifecycle management for how people should be like, well, it was hard to have a good preface for how people should be managing these CRDs. So I tell you what, I will compile more. It sounds like this is very interesting to this group. I am happy to compile more of the CRD specific things since everybody kind of dug into that so that we can have further conversations about that.
Yeah, I think that the interest. Oh, sorry, Tim.
I was
For
just
me,
gonna
I wanted.
go ahead, Antonio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I wanted to say is that will really be really valuable to understand really the problems, right? More than we have a life cycle problem. To go one by one.
Yeah, we need to get really concrete with the problems. Like, I mean, I've said it many times, but Gateway is paying the pioneer tax here. And you know, you're the first
Yes,
one there,
indeed.
so you get to build roads and set up a post office. I think the API machinery group is very interested in learning what works, what doesn't work, where could we do better. And not just about how do we manage CRDs and CRD life cycles, but like we've had this conversation in SIG architecture about alpha and beta and what does that really mean. We have had ongoing discussions about even extension-ish APIs that are different from custom resources. Like, could I extend an existing resource with something that looks like CRD but extends an existing resource? Maybe that's how we implement alpha beta in the future. So it would be super useful to compile like the concrete list of problems of like we did X and it doesn't work because Y, so that we can look at it and figure out is there something that maybe you don't know about or maybe that the API machinery team could fix quickly, or do we need deeper changes because we're open to them? We just need to know what is motivating them. I say we here. I'm not really on the API machinery group, but I care a lot about that. So I think, you know, with KubeCon coming up in a couple of weeks and the contributor summit, this is an awesome opportunity to get Joe and I'm assuming David will be there, but I don't know, I haven't confirmed. And CC and the other folks who spend all their time in API machinery to think about this. I have a running list, a document that I call Tim's terrible ideas for API machinery. And, you know, they've picked a couple of them and we're like, actually, this isn't so terrible. So, and they're mostly centered around extending and alpha beta and how do we deal with those things.
Roger that. And to that point, first things first, that is kind of the phase that we are in right now with this. We are gathering more and more information and basically trying to get ahead of this problem, and so that we can be very, very distinct and start making improvement. We are trying to be the change we want to see because, like you said, we're kind of pioneering here. And so we'll work on more of that. And then the second thing, Joel and David in particular are kind of clued in part of this early conversations about how some of the problems we're running into and stuff like that. So we're thinking about things like a lot of different things, including like there's a validation tool out there right now that may be going upstream for kind of very deep validation of CRD upgrades to make sure that they're safe. I really want to see that in upstream because I would like to use that in CI in E2E releases or E2E tests for releases for Gateway API, for instance. So there's there's no smoking gun kind of situation either. There's just lots of different things going on. But it sounds good to continue thinking about this, especially at KubeCon with all the people who maybe are the more particular experts and come back and keep talking about like, all right, here are the very distinct issues we can start digging into. So I'll bring this conversation up here again, and I'm glad that everybody found that in particular so interesting. If you find any of the other stuff interesting too, like I said, there will be breakout sessions, probably on CRD stuff as well at KubeCon Salt Lake. What else? I think that about it. I think that's about it. Okay. So, and we're at time, so that worked out perfectly. Cool. So thank you everybody for coming. I don't see if you have anything that you just thought of that's like I really actually wanted to talk about this, or if you want to follow up on any of these things, do feel free to drop something in the parking lot for our next meeting in a couple of. Will we be KubeCon? No, we will have it in a couple of weeks.
So actually, that was my question. Are we going to have a meeting in 2 weeks? Is days before KubeCon?
4 days before KubeCon, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I intend to be very busy finishing my KubeCon work.
When is code freeze? I think that is
Also
about
code
that
free.
time.
Yes, it's like that same week, or it's like within days. So if we don't have a compelling agenda, I would maybe move that we scrap the next one and
I'm in favor.
meet again after KubeCon.
Me too.
Are we doing a lunch at KubeCon? I didn't see an invitation. I didn't do the planning.
So they have turned the SIG meet and greet into a lunch in the project pavilion
Oh,
now.
that's right.
So they are basically facilitating what we have been forcing them to do at KubeCons.
Okay. All right, then. Let's all agree that we'll meet at the SIG meet and greet lunch. Lunch, which is 2 hours or something, right?
Yeah.
But we decide to postpone the next one or not? Or
Yes. Let's just cancel the meeting 2 weeks from today.
I prefer to cancel too.
Perfect. Okay, then. We'll see some of you at KubeCon, and we'll see the rest of you in 4 weeks from today.
Bye.
Thanks.